And perhaps in a sign of how it all would end, we see pictures he sent to NBC, a knife at his neck, a gun poised at his head. Also tonight, new revelations about Cho's mental state. A court ruling, none of it was enough to get Cho Seung-Hui the help he so desperately needed or to provide the people here with the safety they so desperately deserved.
A package was sent by the gunman to NBC's headquarters in New York the day of the mayhem. What is being called a multimedia manifesto includes 27 video files.
You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. The decision was yours. Now you have blood on your hands that will never wash off.
The package is not addressed to anyone particular, but is full of venom and hatred from a man who believes the world has done him wrong.
Do you know what it feels like to be spit on your face and have trash shoved down your throat? Do you know what it feels like to dig your own grave? Do you know what it feels like to have your throat slashed from ear to ear? Do you know what it feels like to be torched alive? Do you know what it feels like to be humiliated and be impaled upon on a cross and left to bleed to death for your amusement? You have never felt a single ounce of pain your whole life. Did you want to inject as much misery in our lives as you can, just because you can? I may be nothing but a piece of You have vandalized my heart, raped my soul, and torched my conscience. You thought it was one pathetic void light you were extinguishing. Thanks to you, I die, like Jesus Christ, to inspire generations of the weak and the defenseless people. You loved inducing cancer in my head, terrorizing my heart, and raping my soul all this time.
Our nation is shocked and saddened by the news of the shootings at Virginia Tech today. The exact toll has not yet been confirmed, but it appears that more than 30 people were killed and many more were wounded.
Well, basically, I was in Norris Hall, which is the place of the second shooting, and the gunman came into our class after he had fired maybe 10 rounds prior to that. And he came into our class, shot the person that was sitting next to me, shot our professor, then I hid under the desk, and then he proceeded to shoot everybody else in our class, practically. There were probably 15 to 20 people in our class, and he shot maybe 10 to 15 of them. He was male, Asian descent, and he was about 6 feet tall, wearing a black leather coat and then a maroon hat. And he didn't say anything, which I found very unusual. He just started shooting people, and it's truly tragic. It looked like he just had one handgun, like a 9mm handgun. He emptied maybe 8 gunshots into our classroom and then reloaded it while he was there, and emptied about another 8 gunshots. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, a gunman shooting people without saying anything just seems like his intent to kill is just irrational.
Was there screaming? Was it weirdly silent?
It was almost like a calm silence, like nothing, like a Twilight Zone or something.
The Department of Education came down hard on Virginia Tech today for the way it handled the 2007 shooting rampage. The final report says the school violated federal law by not alerting students in a timely fashion, suggesting dozens of lives could have been saved. The first email didn't go out until 2 hours after Seung-Hui Cho killed 2 students in a dorm. By then, he was already chaining the doors to a building where he then killed 30 more students and faculty, and then himself in the worst mass shooting in U.S. history.
Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. We are picking up on part 2 of our series examining Seung-Hui Cho in the Virginia Tech massacre. Now, this 2-part series is part of a broader series that I have been working on called Dark Nights, which is examining certain historical events through the lens of MKULTRA, programmed to kill domestic gladio in the strategy of tension. If you haven't watched part 1, I recommend you do so before watching this part. I will link that in the video description. So let's just jump right into it. Cho's mental health records were hidden for 2 years. From the Associated Press, Virginia Tech gunman's mental records found in home. Mental health records for the Virginia Tech gunman Seung-Hui Cho have been discovered in the home of the university clinic's former director. How strange. And from John Grohol, oops, did I have those records? You may remember the Virginia Tech tragedy more than 2 years ago when a student at the university, Seung-Hui Cho, opened fire one day on his classmates, killing 32 people and himself on April 16, 2007. What you may not have known is that Cho's mental health records from when he was seen at the university's counseling center went missing and were never located until now. Quote, mental health records for Virginia Tech gunman Seung-Hui Cho that were missing for more than 2 years have been discovered in the home of the university clinic's former director, according to a state memo shared with victims' family members. Cho killed 32 people on April 16, then unalived himself as police closed in. His mental health treatment has been a major issue in the vast investigation of the shootings, yet their records location had eluded authorities. But Cho's weren't the only records found in Dr. Miller, the former director's house. A memo from the university says Cho's records and those of several other Virginia Tech students were found last week in the home of Dr. Robert C. Miller. The memo said Cho's records were removed from the Cook Counseling Center on the Virginia Tech campus more than a year before the shootings, when Miller left the clinic. How strange. Why would he take these files home? What was the purpose of that? Is that not suspicious? So looking at his psych evaluation from Clarion, this was conducted December 13, 2005. He was diagnosed with a mood disorder. History of present illness. The patient is very resistant to discussing how he feels and if he has any symptoms of depression or mood changes. He stated he emailed a friend yesterday that he felt like he should just unalive himself. The patient states he was just kidding around, but that the friend, that was Andy Koch, ended up calling the police, and that's why the patient ended up at St. Albans. He says it's all a misunderstanding. The patient denies suicidal ideation. However, he is very nonverbal and did not discuss feelings. Past medical history, the patient denies any surgical procedure. That was a lie. He had that procedure, the echocardiogram, when he was a child in Korea. That was very traumatic for him. And in fact, after that, his family reported he didn't like being touched, and he was considered medically frail as a child. He was also diagnosed with selective mutism. He denies any history of medical problems, did not answer if he had any previous depression. He just looks down at the floor. He has no primary MD that he has seen in years. Allergies, he has no known drug allergies. Family history, his mother is healthy, his father is healthy. His sister is 24. They all live in Northern Virginia. He says they are all healthy. Other family history unknown. Social history. The patient is a junior at Virginia Tech studying in English. He wants to be a creative writer, does not want to go to graduate school, lives on campus with a roommate. He says they get along okay. He has lived in Northern Virginia for 10 years. Prior to that, he lived in Korea. He denies the use of tobacco, alcohol, or drugs. Occasionally, he states he goes to the gym, but otherwise does not discuss what he does for fun, denies having any hobbies, does state he is keeping up in school and that his grades are okay, states he has an exam tomorrow in British literature. Medications. Current medications are Ativan, 1 milligram every 6 hours for anxiety. From the physical examination, vital signs 158.6, 5'8", so he's only 5'8" tall, blood pressure 128/63, pulse 69, respirations 18. Physical exam, patient very nonverbal, very quiet, sits in the chair looking down at the floor, does not blink. Often does not answer questions or perhaps shakes his head yes or no. When he does speak, it's very slow, very soft-spoken. No smile, no laughter, no crying. Patient does not blink. That is a very odd observation, but it's one we've heard before when we have examined other cases like this. The patient speaks so softly, it's almost difficult to hear him. Eyes, pupils equal, round, and reactive to light. Extraocular movements intact. Fundoscopic exam appears within normal limits. Did stress that patient needs to get an eye exam since it's been 2 years since he's had an eye exam. Ears, nose, and throat within normal limits. Patient has very healthy teeth, neck is supple, non-tender, thyroid within normal limits. Chest clear to auscultation anteriorly and posteriorly, heart regular rate and rhythm, abdomen, bowel sounds, X4, soft, non-tender, no rebound. Femoral pulses normal, peripheral pulses normal, no swelling of the lower extremities, no scars noted. The patient denies tattoos. Neurologic exam, cranial nerves was within normal limits with negative Romberg. Patient is able to follow all instructions and does so deliberately and slowly. Patient's labs essentially look within the normal limits, including CBC, urinalysis, liver function test, and chemistry panel. Patient has full range of motion of all extremities, and strengths appear to be 5 out of 5. He has 2+ deep tendon reflexes of all extremities. Assessment. Mood disorder. Very difficult to get a verbal history from this patient regarding signs of a mood disorder or depression. Patient to be treated by Dr. Jasdeep Miglani, who has suggested he can be treated on an outpatient basis with counseling. Patient in need of an eye exam, as it has been 2 years since his last eye exam. Patient to be treated by Dr. Miglani and hopefully have some intervention and therapy for treatment for his mood disorder. And that was from the involuntary commitment process that was supposed to occur, that was signed off by a judge when he was essentially like medically kidnapped. So he was never committed, though. They just allowed him to get outpatient treatment that was apparently never followed up on. And then the director of the school's mental health clinic took his records and kept them at his home. How bizarre. Joshua Stileman has written extensively on the history of MKUltra in mind control and how the programs have been operationalized in modern times. He writes, as Ross documents, the major goal of the Cold War mind control programs was to create dissociative symptoms and disorders, including full multiple personality disorder. This wasn't merely scientific curiosity. It was a methodical attempt to fracture human consciousness into programmable components. Under Sidney Gottlieb's direction, MKUltra encompassed 162 documented subprograms projects across 44 universities, 12 hospitals, and various other institutions. These projects explored chemical manipulation, electronic stimulation, trauma-based methods, and sophisticated hypnotic techniques, all aimed at creating controllable dissociative states. The ultimate goal was to develop reliable methods to compel individuals to perform actions, including operations that would violate their moral code or self-interest, and subsequently have no memory of having performed these tasks, essentially creating programmable human assets who could be activated and directed without their awareness. What began in controlled laboratory environments would soon find expression at scale, as these techniques evolved from experimental procedures to institutional frameworks which were quietly embedded in respected organizations and cultural systems. The transition from laboratory to institution represents a critical evolution in methodology, where MKUltra required direct physical access to subjects and operated within classified constraints. Institutional adoption allowed these techniques to scale through trusted cultural channels. The same dissociative states once induced through trauma and chemicals could now be achieved through cultural programming, environmental design, and social influence. This shift, unseen by the public, was transformative. Control mechanisms shed their explicit nature and became subtly and surreptitiously embedded in the fabric of everyday life, operating through the very institutions people trusted most. In another surreal coincidence, John Frankenheimer, director of the film The Manchurian Candidate, which depicts a programmed assassin, was with RFK the day he was killed. The film's plot centered on a brainwashed Korean War veteran programmed to assassinate a presidential candidate. Dr. Jolly West himself had conducted extensive research on returned Korean War POWs, studying precisely the type of conditioning depicted in the film. Could these parallels to Kennedy's assassination be mere chance? Aldous Huxley's writings on population control, mass persuasion, and the use of psychedelics for behavioral conditioning align closely with the core themes explored by the Tavistock Institute, a post-war British organization focused on social psychology, propaganda, and behavioral engineering. While direct employment at Tavistock is not documented, his intellectual contributions deeply intersected with its objectives, and his brother Julian's leadership at UNESCO helped institutionalize similar frameworks on a global scale. As documented in Huxley's correspondence with MKUltra's key figures, he conceptualized how states of overwhelm following traumatic events could create ideal conditions for implanting new patterns of thought across entire populations. This connection completes the circuit between theory and application. What began as Huxley's philosophical exploration in works like The Doors of Perception evolved into the operational techniques deployed by Dr. West and others across these high-profile cases, creating a direct line from literary theory to historical manipulation. And when people ask for a motivation for something like these mass events, what would be the motivation to do something like this? It is that right there. The idea being that this traumatic event broadcast 24/7 on the news cycle across the nation about a school shooting traumatizes the public, creating the conditions to implant new thought patterns across entire populations. And we have MK Often in Spellbinder. In addition to these documented sub-projects, extensions like Project Often, documented in declassified files released in 1977, researched toxins and biological agents that could alter behavior and consciousness, including exploration of occult materials. Project Spellbinder, detailed in a 1976 Church Committee report, focused specifically on creating sleeper assassins who could be triggered to carry out missions with no conscious awareness or memory, the real-world implementation of the Manchurian Candidate concept. The Manchurian Candidate is a 1962 film in which an American soldier is captured, brainwashed, and programmed to become an unwitting assassin who can be triggered by specific cues and has no memory of his actions afterward, precisely the capability intelligence agencies sought to develop. From William Sargent's Battle for the Mind, quote, "The possible relevance of these experiments to sudden religious and political conversion should be obvious even to the most skeptical. Pavlov has shown by repeated and repeatable experiment just how a dog, like a man, can be conditioned to hate what it previously loved and love what it previously hated. Similarly, one set of behavior patterns in man can be temporarily replaced by another that altogether contradicts it, not by persuasive indoctrination alone, but also by imposing intolerable strains on a normally functioning brain." So when we look at the FBI file on Seung-Hui Cho, which is quite small, by the way, it is only 99 pages and most of it like nonsense, there was this excerpt here. Redacted recalls Cho being enrolled in the 4-week course. This is talking about when he was in school in Korea. Cho would talk about his native home in South Korea and the extreme poverty, starvation, and abuse there. When Cho discussed his life in South Korea, he would laugh hysterically. After 1 week, Cho was kicked out of the program because of his fights with other students. Redacted remembers Cho kicking another student in the head. And this is interesting because none of that appears in TriData's official report and investigation into Cho, but it sounds like he was potentially subjected to some form of abuse while he lived in Korea. One other thing that I found in the FBI file was this bizarre mention here to Indianapolis from Richmond, dated the day after the massacre. Redacted posted a message at chiefdelphi.com forum stating, regarding the Virginia Tech shooting, thoughts go out to VTech. Just thought I'd let you know somebody announced they were going to do it on 4chan today. They posted it around 5 a.m. this morning. Anonymous 41607. Hey B, that's the B board, I'm going to unalive people at VTech today in the name of Anonymous. Other things that have actually happened on 4chan, just to say that some people on here are serious, include someone videotaping their own unaliving and the origin of the national scare of bombing sports areas were people on 4chan. So it seemed like somebody put in a false tip to the FBI about this being announced on 4chan and Anonymous, being responsible for it. Very bizarre. Now, also, from the files, we find that it was apparently hard to find information on Cho as a student. The college, Virginia Tech, was apparently having difficulty with it. This is from 5:32 p.m., September 11, 2006. And they write, I have not been very successful in finding out much about this student. He is a permanent resident with a legal address in Centerville, Virginia. He did not transfer any credits into Virginia Tech that might give us a better idea of his experiences. My guess is that this is a combination of English as an SL, second language, and cultural issues. Culturally, the issue may be simply feeling comfortable speaking in class. That said, if Lucinda, this is talking about Lucinda Roy, who we discussed in part 1, if Lucinda was not able to make him comfortable, this may be close to impossible. He has an academic advisor spoken with him very specifically about the concerns. From his transcript, it looks like he does well in some classes and poorly in others. I would be very happy to ask him to come see me and to talk to him. Maybe our English conversation groups would help him gain comfort in speaking in front of the group. Kim. So they were having problems getting him to speak in class, and somehow Virginia Tech was not aware of the fact that when he was in high school going to Westfield, he had a specialized education plan. It was an individualized educational plan where he did not have to do public speaking due to the fact that he had been previously diagnosed with selective mutism. And so I find that very strange. And then we have his immigration record here. Immigrant visa and alien registration. This is dated September of 1992. And when the family first moved from Korea to the United States, they first lived in Maryland, and then they moved to Northern Virginia. And you can see the picture of him looks kind of different than the other pictures that we've seen of him, even when he was young. So I find that to be interesting. We have Cheryl's notes on Cho's demeanor. This was from 2005, so 2 years before the massacre. October 19, 2005, Cheryl's notes on the 1:30 meeting with Seung-Hui Cho, Lucinda Roy, and Cheryl Ruggiero, the assistant. She writes, I am struck immediately by Seung Cho's physical aspect. He has a choice of seating, the chair opposite mine, close to Lucinda's desk, or the sofa, and he chooses the sofa, as far as possible from either of us. Understandable. When I'm introduced and shake his hand is very sweaty and remains straight, does not clasp my hand. When he sits, his arms are splayed unnaturally down at his sides, on the armrest and a pillow, open, stiff, hands not resting on the surfaces. He hardly moves at all, his face or his body, either when listening or speaking. He wears a baseball cap pulled very low and reflective sunglasses. His voice is so very low, it's difficult to hear. Throughout, Cho's responses come more slowly than in a normal conversation, and most are monosyllables, like, no, yeah, sure. I've indicated some places where there are even more strikingly long pauses before he responds. I missed some comments, certainly. Lucinda repeated some things several times, especially about what the independent study option could be like. Her tone was friendly and encouraging throughout. So this is the demeanor that he was exhibiting. We had Fred Dagwar wondering if Cho had autism. This is an email from Wednesday. So he had, I think he had talked to her first, forward problem student. So they were referring to him as a problem student. Lisa and all, I heard something about this student last week from Bob, that's Bob Hickok, in Ed. I think he is also currently in Ed Falco's class. I wondered at the time if the dean's office could help. It may be that he has a disorder he is keeping private. Most students let us know when something is going on, but I guess there are those who do not have the means. The dean's office of Seung Cho's college, I guess that would be ours, should have any information if it exists and could make a phone call maybe if no information is currently available. I wondered about autism, but not having met him and not having heard of other more autistic issues involved, I have no idea. Then we have one of his other professors, Carl Bean, who wrote a book on abused kids. Professor Carl Bean was Cho's technical writing professor who had an incident with him. In May of 1996, the Roanoke Times published an article about a book Bean wrote about abused kids, entitled Help for Hurt Kids. Child abuse disgusted him, so the book he writes puts the issue right in your face. The article states, Carl Bean stood before his small congregation to talk about the treatment of children, and his normally soft voice grew loud. Disgusting, the 42-year-old minister proclaimed during a recent Sunday morning sermon as he described what he reads in today's newspapers. The father of two explained how he has become increasingly disturbed by stories that tell of fathers beating their little girls to death or of grown men SAing young boys. We read these headlines, but we don't think too much about them, said Bean, as his own daughters, Sarah, 9, Jessica, 12, sat and listened. We see an ugliness that we don't want to recognize or acknowledge. Bean wanted to get people talking and thinking about child abuse, so he used the subject matter behind those provocative headlines as the basis for his new mystery novel, his first book of fiction, in hopes of relating a social message while getting people to react and take action at the same time. He says, I wrote this for the same reason Jesus spoke in parables, said Bean, pastor at Edgemont Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Christiansburg. I'm telling a story that I find distressing because it tells the story of our world today. The thriller, A Soul to Take, hit stores a week ago and is the first of Bean's 3 suspense novels scheduled for release within the year. That's quite an impressive amount of publishing in 1 year, while also being a full-time professor. The 357-page novel, published by Penguin, follows homicide investigator Rita Tribble as she tracks a serial killer who preys on young boys. The book is fast-paced and explicit at times, especially in the descriptions of the murders that horrify Tribble and her partner, Charlie. Now, this is interesting because there were complaints about Cho in the things that he was writing about in creative writing classes, the subject matter, right? Oh, you're not allowed to write about violence, or, we have to call an entire counseling team at the school. And it's just very bizarre that at the same time these teachers are complaining about their students writing stuff like this. This is what they themselves are writing, and presumably their students are aware of this and are probably reading the books written by their professors. I wanted the immediate proceeds to go to something worthwhile, said Bean, who organized the fundraiser himself. These are people who see this daily and who work to try to protect these children. They work with practically nothing, no budget, and only volunteers, and very rarely get the recognition they deserve. I wanted to help. Sharon Brabham, executive director of the Child Abuse Prevention Council of Roanoke Valley, said word of the donation came unexpectedly. Quote, it takes a lot of time for us to send staff members to seek out funding, and this is helping us a great deal, she said. She will be at the booth signings in Roanoke to answer questions about child abuse prevention. Bean, who lives in Christiansburg with MJ, his wife of 14 years, and his daughters, also teaches creative writing, linguistics, and literature at Virginia Tech. He started writing A Soul to Take in 1993 while working on his doctorate in English at Marquette University in Milwaukee, where the plot unfolds. My drive to write the book was so powerful that I finished it in 3 months, explained Bean, who decided to postpone getting his degree and continue writing and teaching. The idea came as a culmination of a lot of headlines that were distressing to me. The book is graphic with a purpose, he said, to jar people into actually doing something about child abuse. Bean includes meticulous descriptions of crime scenes, autopsies, and murders. It's a technique he claims to have learned and perfected while working as a criminal investigator in the United States Army. Interesting. You can also just go to the library and find books about police procedure, he said. That's how I got most of my information. I was teaching a class at a community college in Milwaukee that offered a degree in criminal justice, and their library was full of books on police procedure and criminal investigation, so I spent most of my time doing research there. Born in Albuquerque, Bean spent much of his childhood moving to various cities as his father was in the Air Force and later became a minister and a treasury agent. Bean, too, joined the military shortly after graduating from Rockford High School in 1972. Later, he went back to school to receive formal training in writing and literature at Drury College in Springfield. He received a bachelor's degree in English in 1982, then graduated with a master's in English from the University of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and later received another master's in literature from Columbia. While at Columbia, he specialized in religious literature and attended the Union Theological Seminary, where he received extensive biblical training. Again, he traced his father's footsteps and eventually became a minister. And now this is interesting because when we look at the manifesto of Seung-Hui Cho, there are biblical themes as well as allusions to child abuse. It's very odd. I think that something terrible has happened to our children that has prevented them from being children anymore, he said. They are having to make decisions about drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, things we never even thought about while growing up. Children are precious and innocent, yet it seems like we treat them like property, and I especially want to change that. This is particularly interesting, given Bean's military background and his father's work in the Air Force and Treasury Department. It's also interesting, as similar themes seem to permeate the writings of Seung-Hui. Bean lived in Christiansburg, and that was where Cho would go to film part of his video manifesto. And it seems like Cho was being targeted by teachers at Virginia Tech. In November 2007, Professor Kenneth Westhughes wrote about the phenomenon of mobbing and how Cho was a victim of this. He criticized how the dominant explanation for what happened at Virginia Tech focused on the identity of Seung-Hui Cho and how he was being described as a madman, monster, demon, a walking time bomb, or psychopath, and that this is not only false, it is a deflection. Kenneth writes, "The most obvious weakness of flawed character theorizing is that it cannot account for the timing of Cho's spree. Why did he not plan and execute it when he was 17 years old, still in high school? Why not when he was 20? Why didn't he wait longer until he was 50 years old, perhaps, and go postal in middle age? Why did Cho's defective identity suddenly manifest itself a few months after his 23rd birthday?" A related weakness of explanation in terms of Cho's allegedly murderous character is that there is no evidence of it prior to the time of the murders. Cho had no record of violence. On account of his extreme reserve, mental health professionals had assessed him as early as 1998 when he was 14 and as late as 2005 when he was 21. None of the experts diagnosed homicidal tendencies. It was only after Cho committed this act that observers discerned in him a murderous personal identity. This is like calling a substance dynamite after it explodes. If it could not be recognized as dynamite earlier, it may well have been something else, maybe a benign substance like garden fertilizer, sawdust, or ripening fruit that detonated under an unusual combination of specific conditions. Explanation of the Virginia Tech massacre in terms of the killer's defective character has led institutions across the continent to search for new ways of identifying students who are dynamite in disguise and for protecting campus communities from them when they go off. When should mass emails of warning be sent? When should a campus be locked down? How can emergency response measures be improved? Is tighter gun control the answer? Or should students be allowed to arm themselves? Cho's character was indeed flawed, as is everyone's more or less in one way or another. Cho's problem was a severe, chronic case of stage fright most of us have at some time experienced. Cho was tongue-tied almost all of the time. In social settings, he froze. He was diagnosed at the age of 14 as having a disorder called selective mutism, the loss of ability to speak out of fear of being laughed at. Cho found it sheer torture to speak in class. On an occasion when he was forced to do so, classmates mocked and ridiculed him. This undoubtedly worsened his condition, and he was very much a loner. This character defect, however, did not make him a freak or monstrosity. He could communicate clearly and effectively on paper and by email. His writing skills were above average. He managed occasional conversations with his parents, sister, and suitemates. During his years at Virginia Tech, he phoned home weekly. He studied hard and was conscientious in fulfilling course requirements. His marks were uneven, but high enough that he graduated from high school, was admitted to Virginia Tech, and was close to completing his degree. He aspired to become a writer. If Cho had been excused from oral presentations and class participation in his courses at Virginia Tech, as he had been in high school, he would probably have graduated without incident. From information that has so far come to light, Cho appears to have been the target of an uncommon but distinct and devastating social process called workplace mobbing. It is the impassioned ganging up of managers and/or peers against a targeted worker, the object being the target's absolute humiliation and elimination from respectable company. It is a matter of turning a person who is different or troublesome into a non-person, rubbing his or her nose in the dirt. By all accounts, the fall semester of 2005 was a turning point in the life of Seung-Hui Cho. The reason, so the evidence suggests, is that during that semester, he was targeted by a group of professors and fellow students in the English department. The single main setting appears to have been Cho's creative writing course. It was taught by distinguished professor Nikki Giovanni, a poet of such fame and scholarly authority that degradation by her would cut to the bone. By Giovanni's admission, she and Cho locked horns, and the conflict between them was played out in full view of the entire class. Unable to understand or tolerate Cho's extreme introversion, Giovanni badgered him, asking him to remove his sunglasses, show his face, and participate in class as other students did. When he resisted, she decided he was, as she put it, a bully, an evil presence in her class. Eventually, Giovanni demanded Cho leave the class. He refused. In a letter to her department chair, Lucinda Roy, Giovanni threatened to resign if Cho were not removed. Cho was then summoned to a meeting in the chair's office with two faculty members, Lucinda Roy and Cheryl Ruggiero. The latter took notes. Roy and Ruggiero undoubtedly intended this meeting as a way to assist a student in difficulty. Given Cho's selective mutism, the meeting probably exacerbated the situation. To be singled out and made the center of concern was Cho's worst nightmare. Being quiet, he wrote in an email to Roy, one would think would repel attention, but I seem to get more attention than I want. I can tell just by the way people stare at me. Cho told Roy he imagined that she was going to yell at him. When she said she would tutor him privately for the remainder of the term and gave him a copy of her book, Cho appeared to her to be crying. There is no evidence that Cho understood Roy's private tutoring as a form of rescue from another professor's wrongful treatment of him. On the contrary, Cho probably sensed Roy shared Giovanni's opinion of him. A 1998 article in Virginia Tech magazine described the special relationship between Roy and Giovanni and said their affection for one another, quote, goes beyond dutiful professional respect or admiration, unquote. Indeed, the article described Virginia Tech's creative writing community as, quote, one big happy family, unquote. To the extent that was true, in 2007, Cho likely saw himself in the role of the family's black sheep, as indeed he was. The next semester, spring of 2006, Cho got on the wrong side of another professor, Robert Hickok, instructor for his fiction workshop. A student who studied with Hickok the previous fall described him on a teacher rating site as, quote, a nice guy, but you absolutely have to talk in class. When he talks about class participation, he doesn't mean answering questions every once in a while. He means blabbing on in front of the whole class, every single class. The more you blab, the better, unquote. Can you imagine how Cho would fare in such a class? Hickok consulted Roy about what to do with him. Cho probably got from Hickok the same message as from Giovanni and Roy, that he was utterly unfit. His final grade in the course was a D+. That same semester, Cho had similar trouble in a technical writing course with Carl Bean. Bean's opinion was that speaking softly was Cho's way of, quote, manipulating people into feeling sorry for him, a way to avoid working on group projects and still get credit, unquote. Bean thought Cho was intelligent but would do, quote, as little as he needed to do to get by, unquote. By the evidence now available of Cho's studiousness, Bean was wrong. He mistook Cho's terror of speaking for laziness. Bean urged Cho to drop the course. Cho did so. His impression undoubtedly reinforced that everybody in his home department wanted to get rid of him. If Nikki Giovanni had been the only professor who treated Cho as an evil presence, he might have withstood her aggression. An anonymous student described being humiliated by Carl Bean in the spring of 2006, saying, quote, he rips you apart if you try to point out that he is wrong. No one is allowed to question him. I have friends that have suffered the wrath of this arrogant teacher like me, unquote. Note the last sentence. This student had friends to commiserate with and probably other professors to rely on for support. Cho, by contrast, faced alone the shared contempt of his teachers and peers. To make matters worse, he got a severe put-down in his student residence in late 2005, in the midst of his humiliation in the English department. In what was presumably a clumsy romantic overture, Cho sent anonymous electronic messages to a fellow resident, a girl he had met through his suite mates. The Massengill report describes these messages as unthreatening, but self-deprecating. Suspecting who had written them, the girl wrote back asking if the sender was Cho. He responded, I do not know who I am. Then, in early December, he left on the whiteboard outside this girl's room the poignant words of Shakespeare's Romeo. He wrote, by a name, I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself, because it is an enemy to thee. Had I written it, I would tear the word. The quote must have captured, better than any others, how Cho had come across in his literary studies, his feelings of desolation and unworthiness of the girl's affections. He knew she knew who he was, but he was too scared to say so. Still, like Romeo, he dared to hope that she would reciprocate his interest in her. Otherwise, he would not have left Shakespeare's words. He was making himself vulnerable, taking the risk of human connection, the only thing that keeps anyone from going mad. The young woman was frightened. She consulted her father, who consulted a friend of his, a small-town chief of police. The latter advised contacting the Virginia Tech campus police. The upshot was that a campus police officer met with Cho on December 13, 2005, and forbade him to have further contact with the young woman. Later that same day, Cho text messaged a suite mate saying he might as well unalive himself. The suite mate contacted campus police, who took Cho in for questioning that evening, had him assessed by a social worker, then had him committed involuntarily to a psychiatric bed in nearby Christiansburg, where he was held overnight. Early the next morning, December 14, Cho was assessed first by a clinical psychologist, then by a psychiatrist, then brought before a special justice of the county circuit court, who ruled that Cho, quote, presents an imminent danger to himself as a result of mental illness, unquote. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, Cho was discharged from the psychiatric facility. At 3 p.m., Cho presented himself as directed at the counseling center back at Virginia Tech. He met with a counselor. According to the Massengill report, on which the account of the whole incident here is based, no written record of this counseling session exists, and the counselor doesn't remember Cho. Cho had nothing further to do with police or mental health authorities, not even when he committed his crimes 15 months later. There is no evidence that Cho's overtures toward the girl in the residence were unfriendly or threatening. They were odd, but so are many romantic overtures by young people. If his and the girl's attraction had been mutual, their relationship might have offset Cho's humiliation in the English department and eased his depression. Even if the girl had declined his advances gently and personally, her rejection might not have cut so deeply. As it was, his overtures triggered a traumatic 24-hour mobbing by strangers in positions of authority, his first ever arrest by police, involuntary detention in a psychiatric facility, successive examination by 4 different mental health professionals in 3 different locations, and a court's formal pronouncement that he was mentally ill. This was a degradation ritual that anyone would take years to recover from. Cho doubtless experienced it as a compounding of the humiliation he'd already undergone in the English department. It must have seemed to him that all relevant authorities at Virginia Tech, along with his fellow students, had reached a consensus that he was crazy, wicked, fit for nothing but to be cast away. Nikki Giovanni could have left Cho alone. No policy obliged her to challenge him, nor to threaten to quit her job if he wasn't removed from her class. Similarly, the students who reported Cho to the police could have ignored him or registered their sentiments with him personally. Giovanni and these students exemplify the way of joining a mob we tend to think of first: spontaneous, self-motivated aggression against another that seems justified on some ground or other, though no official penalty would be applied if one simply found something else to do. The other form of participation in a mob is action that forms part of one's job description. Lucinda Roy, as chair of English, had to do something in response to Giovanni's threat. Similarly, the police, mental health professionals, and judge who dealt with Cho on December 13th and 14th, 2005 were just doing their jobs, fulfilling the duties for which they were being paid. The third circumstance that appears to have interacted destructively with Cho's character was the lessons in violence that he learned in the courses he took for his degree. Nikki Giovanni was a raging anti-white activist who had written extensively about her own violent fantasies. She had no place teaching college students. Here is one of her more famous poems. It's titled "The True Import of Present Dialogue," and most of it I can't even read due to community guidelines, so you'll just have to read between the lines. N-word: can you kill? Can you kill? Can an N kill? Can an N kill a honky? Can an N kill the man? Can you kill N? Huh? N, can you kill? Do you know how to draw blood? Can you poison? Can you stab a Jew? Can you kill, huh? N, can you kill? Can you run a Protestant down with your 68 Eldorado? That's all they're good for anyway. Can you kill? Can you piss on a blonde head? Can you cut it off? Can you kill? An N can die. We ain't got to prove we can die. We got to prove we can kill. They sent us to kill Japan and Africa. We policed Europe. Can you kill? Can you kill a white man? Can you kill the N in you? Can you make your N mind die? Can you kill your N mind and free your black hands to strangle? Can you kill? Can an N kill? Can you shoot straight and fire for good measure? Can you splatter their brains in the street? Can you kill them? Can you lure them to bed to kill them? We kill in Vietnam for them. We kill for UN and NATO and CETO and US and everywhere for all alphabet but black. Can we learn to kill white for black? Learn to kill N's? Learn to be black men? Very bizarre. As Steve Saylor pointed out, she had a bizarre obsession with Molotov cocktails. Ironically, the author of these lines was asked to deliver closing remarks at Virginia Tech's convocation, memorializing the 32 students unalived by Cho. For some reason, Giovanni didn't read her grotesque poem, The True Import. The above poem is not an isolated example. Cho's old professor has had, for example, this Molotov cocktail obsession. In one poem she writes, also a company called Revolution has just issued a special kit for little boys called Burn, Baby. I'm told it has full instructions on how to siphon gas and fill a bottle. And then she writes in another poem, and it occurred to me, maybe I shouldn't write at all, but clean my gun and check my kerosene supply. She switched themes from Kill the Honkies to confessional self-obsession as the market for up-against-the-wall poetry dried up at the end of the 1960s and now laughs off questions about her Cho-like early work. Still, in 1997, the poetess and distinguished professor Nikki Giovanni got Thug Life tattooed on her arm in honor of Tupac Shakur, who was gunned down in a long-running fatal feud with other rappers. She is a minimally talented self-promoter who has exploited various ideological fads over the decades, such as black radicalism, feminism, and Afrocentrism, to secure herself a comfy cincture at Virginia Tech, and to spend her spare time traveling around to hear herself be praised. Her own website lovingly lists 124 quote-unquote awards and honors that she has garnered. Back to Professor Kenneth Westhuse, he writes, the probable reason unmentioned in the Massengill report is that earlier in 2005, the department had targeted another student, Joe Newberry, and reached a consensus he was dangerous and turned him over to campus police and mental health authorities, only to have their unwarranted attack on this student backfire. This according to the lengthy account published on the web by Newberry himself following the Virginia Tech massacre. It is entitled The Truth About the VT Shooting. The similarities between Newberry's case and Cho's are startling. Most of the same creative writing professors were involved, in particular, Robert Hickok, Carl Bean, and the department chair, Lucinda Roy. I found Joe Newberry's account to be very, very interesting. In April of 2007, a former Virginia Tech student named Joe Newberry published an account of what Cho's same professors had subjected him to. It is incredibly well articulated and revealing. It is quite long and detailed, so I'm only going to read excerpts from it, but I might do a follow-up just on Newberry's account because it is so alarming. Joe writes, as a student who graduated from Virginia Tech with a degree in English in 2005, I had an experience in the English department that paralleled almost exactly that of Seung-Hui Cho. I consider myself uniquely positioned to comment on those events. I witnessed firsthand the enactment of Virginia Tech administration policy regarding so-called threatening and offensive material. I came to know the personalities involved, including the head of the department, as well as the professors under whom Seung-Hui Cho reportedly studied. My own treatment at the hands of the university was worse than that of Seung-Hui's. And indeed, it could be argued that the misapplication of campus policy in my own case and the backlash of sorts that followed resulted in a weariness on the part of those in the English department to pursue the genuine threat that later emerged. I entered Simmons Rock College of Bard in 1997 at the age of 17. It is an early college intended as an early exit from high school for those wealthy enough to afford it. I spent my third year of undergrad work in Germany. Disgusted by the state of my cherished subject, philosophy, and tired of the play acting that sustains university life, I returned to the United States midway through the year. I entered the working world and ended up in Virginia, where I got married and had a daughter. Having been fired from a customer service job for writing amusing and fictitious emails, I decided to go back to school and get a degree in the easiest subject I could think of, English. Along the way, I had written a number of short pieces for my own entertainment. These were pieces that featured comic violence, absurd plots, and themes that were over the top. One short story involved a fictional detective on the JonBenet Ramsey case who traveled through time and who also happened to be the murderer. He abducted random kids from the playground and brought them before his own independent tribunal, half aware that he himself was the killer and, you guessed it, ritualistically force-fed the kids pieces of his own buttocks. For some over the age of 30, it's hard to imagine the capacity that the younger generation has for entertaining these kinds of violent imagery and terrible ideas. But the fact is that basic conditions are the same today as in generations past. Those in authority, including the government, the media, the legal system, the corporate world, are utterly corrupt and without morals. The hypocrisy and denial at all levels is at such a fever pitch now that those in control are nearly pathological, totally unaware of the basic fraudulence of their situations. When I entered Virginia Tech and attended classes, I was immediately struck by the total lack of grounding students had in history, even basic knowledge about the world. It was not a question of lapses or holes in their knowledge. These kids really knew nothing. But Virginia Tech is essentially two schools. There is a math and science school sustained by government research grants, populated largely by students who have immigrated and were unable to get into a better school. The other school is a backwater, peopled mainly by white kids brought in by a clean sweep of an area with a 300-mile radius. These kids ended up at Virginia Tech because their grades in high school were nominally better than those of their peers. They are at Virginia Tech to get a degree in an empty subject like English and enjoy 4 years of partying hard. The first school of the hard sciences constitutes a kind of dispirited elite nursing a hidden secret. The second school is what Virginia Tech has traditionally been, a farm school. Asking a question in class or having to get feedback on my own work was like peering into a deep and bottomless well. For most of the students, the light was on and no one was home. Unfortunately, it quickly became clear to me that at Virginia Tech, professors were not a higher form of human being. Instead, they were very nearly worse. From having bizarre insecurities and complexes that showed themselves in class to being simply petty and even deceitful, some professors in the English department were simply not educators. They were scarcely even scholars. One quote-unquote instructor, convinced she was a pre-Raphaelite painting, seemed to consider literature an aberrant form of journalistic prose. She gave literate, well-reasoned essays by students lower marks than she did rambling and clouded essays by those only functionally literate but who tried hard. Another instructor was a tiny bumbling man with a sneer who claimed to be an ordained pastor and opened his creative writing class with the question of what is evil and what cannot be allowed in literature. He wrote canned crime novels. This is Carl Bean. Shows like Heart to Heart and crime dramas from the 70s had him trumped up for imagination every time. And as far as being cutting edge goes, he was located on the handle of a dull spoon. This fellow, Carl Bean, will figure later in the story. Though these characterizations might sound trite, they have a direct bearing on the shootings. Professors in charge of the education of kids scarcely 18 years old, who were themselves out of touch and to a degree unbalanced, unable to correctly identify a threat in my case, or unable to connect to a troubled kid and prevent a shooting in Cho's case. At the start of my third and final semester, I encountered more resistance and what seemed to be real persecution. At the start of my required poetry class, a fellow by the name of Bob Hickok took me aside and gave me a talking to that I will never forget, though I try from time to time to black it out. The first assignment had been to write a one-page description of our influences and what they meant to us. I submitted a tongue-in-cheek but graphic and flamboyantly described list: Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, a woman I'd slept with who had a giant mole on her rear end. I include the piece with this article for the sake of objectivity. What separates the piece from genuinely unbalanced writing is, first of all, the quality of the prose, and secondly, the juxtaposition of the absurd elements: serial killers and a woman with a giant mole on her rear end. I had a natural expectation this would be recognized, and in no case anticipated a violent reaction. Bob Hickok, who enjoys a certain local respect for being a younger poet, he's in his early 40s at the time this was written, who had worked for a living and for a while had been a non-academic, gave me the most stereotypical authoritarian performance I'd ever witnessed. It was transparent enough that I half wondered whether it was parody when I wasn't busy being totally taken aback. "Who do you think you are?" he asked at one point. Then, for emphasis, "You're no better than anybody else here." Stunned, I spent long minutes looking at the floor. Here I was, a father and husband, rules that society pays a lot of lip service to, someone who'd gone to college early and had, in the past, been called brilliant, getting lambasted in a completely ridiculous way by a guy who didn't know who I was on the basis of a single piece of writing. When he demanded, "Look at me," at one point, I almost laughed out loud, but the indignity of it had dampened my spirits. I submitted a set of samples of my own work to Carl Bean, instructor for a class on short story writing, privately and via email. Strangely, I received no reply. A few professors became fans of mine, one calling what I'd written over the past few years the best writing he'd seen in 25 years. In fact, far from being a troubled loner who hovered in darkness outside the department, I was on friendly terms with a number of professors. The department head, Lucinda Roy, who has earned for herself a brief moment of fame by coming forward and saying she tried to approach Seung-Hui Cho on a one-on-one basis, made herself my own academic advisor midway through the semester. It was unusual since I already had an advisor, but I flattered myself that she was interested in me because of the quality of the writing I'd done, some of which at that point I had submitted to her myself. In a pattern which would duplicate exactly that of Seung-Hui, I was brought to her office weekly for a discussion. At the time, I looked forward to these meetings. Dr. Roy was warm and pleasant, a very intelligent woman. Having been thwarted in my attempts to get intellectual stimulation at Virginia Tech and in the English department in particular, and now having an uneasy relationship with certain faculty members, I approached my meetings with her with a positive outlook. I reflected somewhat bitterly on the fact that I was being summoned more or less because of the controversy that had been created, but even so, it was nice to meet with the department head and to be accorded a kind of special status. With a month left in the semester, which would be my last, I was summoned to Dr. Roy's office by an answering machine message. Her secretary instructed me to appear in Dr. Roy's office first thing Monday morning. I had recently dropped another bomb in the poetry class, a set of love poems to Terry Schiavo, and I figured I was in trouble again. Not my best writing, to be sure, but by now I was giving up the struggle. What I encountered when I arrived, I could not possibly have expected. In Dr. Roy's office sat 2 Virginia Tech police detectives. Initially, I did not know they were police officers. I assumed she was in another meeting and poked my head in the door to let her know I was there. She beckoned me in and identified the 2 seated as police detectives. It was an ambush. At that moment, I knew I had been had. As they arose, I didn't look at her, but caught a glimpse of her face out of the corner of my eye. There was no guilt there or regret. There was only uncertainty about how I would react. The most unkindest cut of all. On my face, I am quite sure, there was a look of utter dread. I was patted down and asked to go with the detectives. I was not allowed to walk behind them. Downstairs, I was ushered into a police vehicle. After I was patted down again, one of the detectives sat next to me in the back seat, apparently to keep me from floating out of the window. I was driven off campus to an undisclosed location, which laughably turned out to be a building sitting right next to an Italian restaurant where I had eaten 3 or 4 times. Once inside, after being told to sign in, I was escorted, flanked on both sides by the 2 officers, a man and a woman, into a small room. I was asked to sit down in a chair on the far side back to the wall facing 3 other chairs. A camera was mounted on the wall in the opposite corner. I have no idea whether it was a working camera or not. The woman took the chair to my left, the man sat to my right. The middle chair was vacant. I remember the detectives talking to themselves as I sat there in the special way that cops can talk about a person who is right there in the room as if he isn't. Bear in mind, up to this point, I knew nothing about why I had been taken to a room off campus by police investigators. I had vivid suspicions, but at no point had I been clearly told what was going on or told that I had a right to decline this trip, which may or may not have been the case. The detective said blandly, "We have to wait for someone else to arrive," and she sure did. After 10 minutes of waiting, there walked into the room a woman around 5 feet in height with stringy gray hair and a tiny gimp arm that looked like a broken baby bird's wing. In that crippled arm, she had decided to carry her clipboard. She hobbled into the room. It was clear, even at that early stage, she had no warm feelings for me. When she took her seat, the 3 official people, 2 cops, and the third, who had by now been identified as a therapist, quote unquote, commenced with a totally empty and meaningless theatrical ploy. They sat and for another 10 minutes reviewed separate manila folders, each an 1.5 inches thick, within which I was told was my file. In it was every assignment I had submitted for creative writing classes, every set of samples I had privately submitted to professors, every crank letter I had written to the campus newspaper. I was amazed they had amassed all of this writing, and appalled that I now had to sit and watch them read what they must have already read, since otherwise I would not have even been there. What followed was an hour and 15-minute interrogation, during which I was asked to defend my writing to people who, for all I knew, were only functionally literate and who, in any event, had no training in literature. The gimp woman, who had the gleam in the eye of every zealot, asked a number of questions that were unspeakably stupid. "Would you want your 3-year-old child reading this?" I was asked. "No," I answered. I declined to mention that she didn't know how to read. "Are you afraid that by writing this, someone is going to go out and do this?" My answer, "No." They weren't getting very far. By midpoint in the interrogation, I'd brought the female cop over to my side. In actual fact, she was a 7-month pregnant woman, endowed with the special kind of common sense every pregnant mother needs for survival. She'd guessed early on that I was no threat. The other cop didn't have enough imagination to be convinced that a human being could be behind writing that was outrageous by all the accepted standards. But he was tiring from this effort, and the questions from him were becoming fewer and farther between. There is something to be said about crazy people going into psychology as a phenomenon, and if it has not already been said, it is still a truism for being unarticulated. The gimp woman was worked up into a lather, and rather than easing up as the interrogation went interminably on, she had the bit between her teeth. She was convinced that I was not only a sociopath, but a child molester, serial killer, and evil in the strictest theological sense. At the interview's end, she excused herself from the room, purportedly to bring back some paperwork. When she returned, she made an announcement, and it took on the form of a vow. "I believe you are a threat to yourself and to people around you. If the university is not going to do anything about it, I will." She then announced she was contacting social services to have my daughter taken away. At this point, the situation turned from an inconvenience to an outrage. I had been separated from my wife for some time, a marriage that was failing because I was young, reckless, and took her love for granted, and now had my own apartment across town, but I made no effort to communicate this. I was convinced that her plan would fail when it was realized I was not even sharing the same house as my daughter. Nonetheless, the full arc of my experience, which I had traveled from submitting tasteless homework assignments for English classes to the threat of my daughter being taken away and forced into foster care, was by now unbelievable. I made efforts during the week to contact First Amendment lawyers. The fees were astronomical. I attempted to contact the ACLU, but since my case did not match their celebrated causes, the right for Klansmen to have their sheets dry cleaned at the same price as other customers, for example, my calls went unanswered. I became desperate, demoralized, exacerbated. I avoided my classes that week. I met with professors whom I discovered, based on university policy, had been secretly forwarding every bit of writing I submitted to the department head, who then forwarded it to the Virginia Tech police. Bob Hickok lied to my face and denied that he would do such an unspeakable thing, only to be contradicted by higher authorities who presented me with copies of materials submitted to him alone. I asked him whether some of the clear and cogently written articles of literary criticism I had submitted, one of which he even hypocritically asked to be allowed to put up on the website, did not prove I was clear-headed and not insane. He didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Carl Bean, whom I did not approach at all, had, I later learned, within hours of my submitting a set of writing samples via email, forwarded all to the administration. The next several classes he had spent in a fairly pathetically obvious way dwelling on the subjects of evil and mental illness. Here and there, I countered, equally obliquely with possible objections, taking an intellectual interest in the fairly phony reasoning and trying to overlook the offensive fact that it was all more or less directed at me. I met with some of the professors who'd been fans of mine. To their credit, they had met with Lucinda Roy and spoke in my defense, but they seemed weary and in fear for their own jobs ultimately. While I could get a sympathetic ear when I entered their offices, I saw nothing to suggest heroic measures on my behalf. The best advice I could get was get away from Virginia Tech. I was on my own. Acting as I hoped and expected, the head of the English department consented to my request. I heard secondhand she had been concerned about social services intervention. In my letter, I threatened legal action against the university as a result of that intervention. It seems she noticed that events had spiraled out of her control. In other words, a shitstorm had developed with unpredictable variables. The matter was hushed up, and I was given my degree. The idiocy of my ordeal, the fact that my outward demeanor was sociable and far from threatening, that my writing never threatened anyone personally, and was mainly guilty of being politically incorrect, and the fact that I was only a month away from graduating, all point to the semi-hysterical environment of the college setting, and of the Virginia Tech English department in particular. I was put through the ringer for what amounted to unconventional writing. In a department which encouraged this by at least paying lip service to that very ideal, my treatment was unnecessary, unfair, and for that reason, immoral. Yet it can be argued that in their handling of me, the English department at Virginia Tech blew their load and as a result later allowed someone who visibly demonstrated troubling behavior to slip through the cracks. Why was Seung-Hui never taken off campus and questioned in the same manner? According to news reports, it was merely recommended to him he seek counseling, which he refused. Why the discrepancy in treatment? Was my own writing that much worse or better than his? At the very least, the fact that no one managed to connect with the shooter on a human level can be fairly well explained by the fact that they were too busy employing the shotgun approach, chasing after the ghosts of political incorrectness in the manner of all universities across the country, and therefore could not deal with a genuine threat in a direct and focused way. I must say this as a point of clarity. At no college that I ever attended had I encountered the kind of basic mistrust, fear, and visceral resistance to myself personally that I encountered at Virginia Tech. In schools in the Northeast, I received praise and encouragement. In Germany, I had the respect of older, more serious students and professors. At Virginia Tech, I ran into a single-minded brick wall that equated any unconventional writing or behavior with direct personal threat. So far from being a totally unexpected event, the question can be asked, did Virginia Tech somehow work to invisibly bring about its own prophecy? After all, I was surely not the only one singled out in this way. Did Virginia Tech's persistent expectation of some tragedy itself lay the conditions for an unbalanced person like Cho to assume the role? On Thursday, April 19, at 9:30 a.m., on the third day after the shooting, I received an email from my wife. 2 state police officers had showed up at the door asking about my whereabouts. You can imagine my reaction. Here I am, someone 2 years out of Virginia Tech, someone who lives an hour away and never visits the place, being roped in for another police interview regarding a shooting I obviously had nothing to do with. There are those who can easily accede to the fantasy of being a helpful, innocent citizen with nothing to hide, thanks to the simple faith that, because you're innocent, no harm can come to you. Regrettably, I am no longer able to play that part. I have seen the system up close, and I have no faith in any reasonable outcome at any time. If at a given moment I am not in jail, it is by the purest accident, not from some steadying bulwark of reason or self-restraint on the part of the system. The email contained a name and contact number for a Dr. So-and-so with the Virginia State Police. I will call him Dr. Van Etten. For the purposes of this writing, for some time I wrestled with what I should do. For one, I was at work when I received the email. Whatever the banalities of the job, having the state police appear would surely jeopardize it. I have bills to pay, including school tuition for my daughter. the only reason I stay with the job in the first place. On the other hand, voluntarily contacting them would almost certainly involve giving up my contact information in a near guarantee of harassment in the future. The matter settled itself when, a half hour later, my phone rang. Here was our Dr. Van Etten. 3 cheers for your detective work. I was asked to agree to a meeting. No, a telephone conversation certainly wouldn't do. It has to be in person. They wanted to reassure themselves of some things. Dr. Van Etten seemed mild enough, but he detected from my tone I was not someone who would or could play the part of a happy citizen willing to shake my head in unison and cue at the calamity and provide exactly what they wanted to hear. A terrible shame, officer. And with a happy-go-lucky laugh, no, couldn't have been me. Therefore, I was a question mark, which to a police officer has a very black meaning. My tone no doubt reflected my genuine agitation at having been dragged into another mess with an unpredictable outcome, not to mention being grouped in again with nutcases and shooters by a school I had only ever sought to get a degree from. Naturally, I consented to the meeting. It took place during my lunch break. They showed up in an unmarked car in plain clothes, a fact for which I was grateful. I met them in the parking lot and was asked to get into the passenger seat while one of them swooped around and climbed into the back. Dr. Van Etten began the questioning from the driver's seat. He informed me that someone had sent an anonymous email to Dr. Lucinda Roy the previous morning. The email was non-threatening and, he said, not illegal. He asked me whether I'd written the email. As I said no, he continued on with a "before you answer" full of ominous portent, doom and gloom about the consequences of not telling the truth. I reiterated my denial. I waved my arms and looked out the passenger window. "You are lying. You just proved it to me, Mr. Newberry, and maybe someday I will tell you how," said the learned investigator. It was clear to me in an instant what had happened and what was happening. The learned doctor, who probably had his degree in criminal psychology, had just satisfied himself with a little bit of his own knowledge regarding body language and had concluded I was guilty. The story gets worse. Van Etten handed me a printout of the email sent to Lucinda Roy. He told me boastfully how the FBI writing analysis computer at Quantico determined the writing was mine, and Lucinda Roy helpfully had supplied my name as a likely suspect. I could tell at a glance that the writing was not mine. Half the sentences began uncapitalized. There was inconsistent spacing after periods. It didn't take time to read it. It appeared to be a fairly juvenile set of accusations against the woefully heroic Dr. Roy, to the effect she was to blame because she had singled out Cho. I handed the paper back to him. The fact that their quote-unquote experts had determined the writing was mine naturally confirmed all my fears about the system. Here I was, someone 2 years out of Virginia Tech, having been wrongfully thought of and slandered as a nutcase during my time there, now getting it all over again, this time with so-called evidence. I didn't write the email I was presented with, which, in any event, I was told was not illegal, and had I wanted to contact the former department head, a person with whom, as far as I'm concerned, no meaningful communication is possible, I would have put my name at the top writ large and at least spelled the words right. I told Van Etten that I hoped he was bluffing about the Quantico analysis. He responded with bluster that he never bluffs. I stopped short of continuing with the point I was wanting to make. No wonder you guys haven't caught any actual bad guys. I also stopped short of asking what Windows 95 computer they were putting the writing into at Quantico. I reiterated several times I had nothing to do with the email. It is true that underneath I was half panic-stricken, and for all that I can do now is berate myself, but as I've said, I have no faith in the system. Van Etten told me that when they tracked down the IP address the email message came from, and if it was any site I frequent, then next time the interview would not be so friendly. What would that mean? That if at any time in the past I have been at a computer, that accessed a Hotmail account, I am de facto guilty. If their IP tracking computer experts are as good as their writing analysis people, I would be pretty much ruined. For all I know, there's a law on the books somewhere about lying to investigators and impeding an official investigation, which, if they are disagreeable enough to use, they will. Combined with the erroneous writing analysis and the specious IP analysis bound to follow, well, you can imagine years of legal costs, possible imprisonment, and tarnished reputation to have come from submitting a few creative writing assignments years before that were perhaps too creative. What of Cho's treatment in his classes? Our faithful news reports tell of Cho being ejected from class by resident poet Nikki Giovanni, purportedly for taking cell phone photos under the table. This fairly juvenile offense could have been done by anyone and would not have resulted in removal from class. Cho was removed because of his demeanor, pure and simple, and this removal was unique. Another faculty member would not have been able to pull it off, but Giovanni was well known in the English department for throwing her weight around. There is a certain kind of black woman from the previous generation obsessed with presenting the appearance of dignity, who confuses stubbornness and heavy-handedness with dignity. The idea that Cho could have been removed from class primarily on the basis of being sullen and unlikable and for having an unnerving manner is repugnant. Was Giovanni unable to cross the ethnic distance that separated her from the solitary, stone-faced Asian youth? Her down-to-earth comment that there was something mean about Cho should be taken in the same regard and given the same value as someone instinctively regarding a black person with suspicion because of his or her darker complexion. Was humanity well served in the case of the handling of Cho? Did this sagacious professor manage to do what was hard, demonstrating real wisdom to avert human tragedy? Or, satisfied with the appearance of wisdom, did she do what was easy, and when a problem struck out, she got rid of it? The fact is that the shooter, even looking for confirmation of his persecution, received ample evidence of it in this heavy-handed instance. So that was excerpts from Joe Newberry's account of what he endured at Virginia Tech at the hands of the same professors in the English department. And it is very strange behavior, very odd. Then, of course, there is Adam Lanza. Adam Lanza was obviously inspired by Cho and had posted about him on his Tumblr account, which was, the screen name for was Queer for Kim Veer. We are told that Seung-Hui had time to film and edit the manifesto. On page 2, sandwiched between a picture of the sky and a photo of Cho in combat fatigues, he wrote, "Are you happy now that you've destroyed my life, now that you have stolen everything you could from me?" The booklet was among a package of papers, videos, and photographs Cho sent to NBC during his brief break in his spree on Monday. He made the final changes to the booklet during that 2-hour spell, and it is thought to have filmed at least one of the video films then as well. In the clip, he is seen wearing the military-style vest described by witnesses. Having finished his manifesto, he walked to a post office and mailed it, and then calmly returned to the campus to gun down 30 other students and a teacher before unaliving himself. How fascinating that he had the time to do all that after just allegedly murdering 2 people at West Ambler Johnson Hall. Now we're going to move to some of his writings, like Richard McBeef. Seung-Hui seems to have been, and I hate to have to bring this up, but unfortunately I do, the victim of childhood SA, as evidenced by his play entitled Richard McBeef that is filled with violence emanating from a PDF file stepfather and his wife who beat their child. In the play, Cho writes, "I will not be molested by an aging, balding, overweight, pedophilic stepdad named Dick." In his poem, A Boy Named Loser, he writes, A boy named Loser walks off the sidewalk, shudders into his house, and lays his weary head to sleep and dream. In his dream, he lives 2 lives, because in his world, he has no life, no class, no friends, just a moron in this world. During its long hours in the real world, it's no surprise he is Loser. Everyone knows. Too bad, they say, only if he had a life. Under the bright, cruel sun, he hulls his feet into his house, thinks about the 2 other lives, keeps on dreaming, daydream. What to do, what to say, but dream. That's what losers do in this world, where normal guys live their happy lives, worry-free and be themselves, unlike Loser. A normal guy throws parties at his house, but not Loser. He has no life. Be happy. Be normal, get a life, he says to himself. He can only in his dream. In Loser's little mind, he brings over a girl to his house. Only if he could do that in this real world, Loser. What can I say? That's what losers do, Loser. Only if Loser could live his lives. Something Loser can't ever do. Lives, those lives, and be normal and actually have a life. You know why he can't do it? He's Loser. With everything he longs for, all he can do is dream, trapped in this world, in this wronged world, nothing to do but drag his heavy feet back into the house. All alone in his little house, he likes to think he's living his lives in his own safe little world. No one tells him, Loser, get a life. No one gives him the hand gesture in his dream. No one calls him Loser. Darn straight, this boy really is Loser. Loser with no life, and he knows it. But he, what can he do, likes to live in his pathetic dream, drowning down in his little quirky house anyway. My God, what a loser. So now we're going to get into the bizarreness of the manifesto. The full manifesto was a multimedia manifesto that was sent out to NBC News. It has never been published in its entirety. We are told he started filming video segments for this in the 6 weeks or so leading up to the massacre, and that he also had time to film a final segment. This was between unaliving Emily Hilscher and Ryan Christopher Clark at West Ambler Johnson Hall around 7 o'clock in the morning, where we are told he had the time to apparently go back to his dorm room, change his bloody clothes, film a final segment, compile it all together along with the written manifesto that was 1,800 words. He had also taken photographs and had different pictures in between the writing. That has never been fully published. And then he apparently went to the post office, mailed that out, came back, and then did his final rampage at Norris Hall. Now, from what I understand, the video segments themselves were around 23 minutes long, and only about 3 or 4 minutes of that was ever publicly released. So NBC News is just sitting on the rest of this and have never released it. And as far as the written manifesto goes, that was never published in full. What we have are what we are told is a transcript from it. They've never published it with the pictures. So that's kind of strange. But I think it's important to read this because of what it might reveal. Again, we don't know that he wrote this for sure. This is what we have been told. So it begins, "Oh, the happiness I could have had mingling among you hedonists, being counted as one of you. Only if you didn't F the living shit out of me. You could have been great. I could have been great. Ask yourself what you did to me to have made me clean the slate. Only if you could be the victim of your reprehensible and wicked crimes, you Christian Nazis, you would have brute restrained your animal urges to F me. You could be at home right now eating your effing caviar and your effing cognac had you not ravenously arred my soul. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Can you feel the pain that you effed us in, you descendants of Satan? Well, can you feel it? all the shit you've given me right back at you with hollow points. And there was apparently a picture of hollow point bullets. Don't you just wish you finished me off when you had the chance? Don't you just wish you killed me? You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. The decision was yours. Now you have blood on your hands that will never wash off, you apostles of sin. Congratulations, you have succeeded in extinguishing my life. Vandalizing my heart wasn't enough for you. R-ing my soul wasn't enough for you. Committing emotional sodomy on me wasn't enough for you. Every single second wasted on your wanton hedonism and menacing sadism could have been used to prevent today. Ask yourselves, what was I doing all this time? All these months, hours, seconds? Only if you could have been the victim of your crimes. Only if you could have been the victim. To you sadistic snobs, I may be nothing but a piece of dog shit. You have vandalized my heart, R-ed my soul, and torched my conscience again and again. You thought it was one pathetic void life you were extinguishing. Thanks to you, I die like Jesus Christ, to inspire generations of the weak and defenseless people, my brothers, sisters, and children that you F. Like Moses, I spread the sea and lead my people, the weak, the defenseless, and the innocent children of all ages that you effed and will always try to F to eternal freedom. Thanks to you sinners, you spillers of blood, I set the example of the century for my children to follow. You may stand steadfast on the battlefield of your life's dedication to eternal terrorism, American Al-Qaeda, but the children you have effed will rise. By the power greater than God, we will hunt you down, you lovers of terrorism. We will kill you. Do they want to F us and pretend to be devout Christians? Do they want to smear dog poop on our face, then give us a dirty towel to wipe away? Do they want to R us and then give us stained toilet paper to clean up? Do they want to cut our throat, then give us a Band-Aid to patch up? Do they want to perpetrate endless sessions of crucifixions and holocausts on our innocent life, then go to church and praise the Lord and Jesus? Do they want to F us and pretend to be Jesus Christ? I say, we're the Jesus Christs. My brothers, sisters, and children, Jesus Christ exists in all of us. Acts Jesus Christ, John Jesus Christ, Jane Jesus Christ, Seung Jesus Christ, Carlos Jesus Christ, Hakeem Jesus Christ, Mohammed Jesus Christ, Zhang Jesus Christ, Oliver Jesus Christ, Elizabeth Jesus Christ, Vladimir Jesus Christ. I say there is no pain they can inflict on us that they haven't already inflicted. I say they can't F us any more than they already have done. I say there are no lies they can say about us that they haven't already said. I say F you, you descendants of Satan, disguised as devout Christians. I say we take up the cross, take up our guns and knives and hammers and take no prisoners and spare no lives until our last breath and last ounce of energy. Seer of veracity, seal of the anti-terrorist. The number of the anti-terrorist, this was a picture of two overlapping 88s. You want to R us? John Mark Cars. You want to R us? Deborah LaFave's. F you. By destroying, we create. We create the feelings in you of what it is like to be the victim, what it is like to be effed and destroyed. Because of your annihilations, we create and raise new breeds of children who will show you effers what you've done to us. Like Easter, it will be a day of rebirth. It will be a start of a revolution of the children that you effed. You have never felt a single ounce of pain your whole life. Thus, by destroying you, by giving you pain, we attempt to show you responsibilities and meanings of other people's lives. It's grand for you to F us 24/7 for fun, but we can't have a single minute of harmless playtime, only suffer. It's dandy for you to R us, but we're not allowed to even speak, only be R'd, F you. You love to pretend to, but you hedonist, charlatans, sadists, arists, terrorists will never know the feeling of giving up your lives for a cause. You have never felt a single ounce of pain in your hedonistic lives. You will never give up a single can of your Bud Light, a shot of your cognac, or a half drop of your own precious blood for another human being, only F the shit out of him and lie afterwards. You F'd us, now we F you, now we kill you. There can be no lighter penalty for masqueraded democratic terrorists who commit unforgivable acts of treason against mankind. There is nowhere in the world you can run, you lovers of tea. There is nowhere in the world you can hide, you lovers of sadism. You will never know when and where the weak and defenseless that you effed will strike, day, night, at school, in the public, in your home, during your most comfortable hour and protected place. You will never know how we will unalive you, slash your throat, bullet in your back, torture you with knives, hammers, bolt cutters, scissors. You will always live in fear. You will never be able to go to school or work or rest or sleep. Your heart will always pound non-stop. Your sin-ridden soul will slowly eat up your conscience for the heinous crimes you've committed. So if you don't want to die a painful death, do yourself a favor. Do yourself a coup de grace and unalive yourself clean, or you will endure pains you can never feel but with our hands. Unalive yourself, or we will hound you down and rip you, all your friends and family into pieces. We have no sympathy in unaliving humans who have no respect for other people's lives. Now that the slate has been cleaned and you have the world's attention, the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to admit the truth, or are you going to stand resolute on your mission to eternally F the weak and defenseless and lie about it? Are you still going to use your power and manipulate the truth to end up with some sort of profit as you've always done? Are you going to skip over all the crimes you've committed and act as victims to the world so you can suck in millions of donation money to turn the situation into a profit? Your $2 million house wasn't enough. Your BMW wasn't enough. Your inheritances weren't enough. You have to F and steal from the poor and the weak who have nothing in order to gratify your effing pride and hedonism. What are you going to do with the blood money? Buy a new Mercedes? You want to brainwash your bratty, snobby kids that it's right to steal from the poor, the weak, and the defenseless, to always stay in power. The fat surpluses that you roll on every day aren't enough. F you. Your answer rings loud and clear. I say we take up the cross, children of Ishmael, take up our guns and knives, any sharp objects, and take no prisoners, and spare no lives until our last breath and last ounce of energy. When you've R'd of everything, you've got nothing to lose. If you have a single milligram of conscience, a grain of integrity, a speck of heart, you will unalive yourself for all the lives you have brutally extinguished. Can you now see all that used to be, all that could have been, and all that is to come, you sadistic charlatans? The blood of the innocents should never be shed, but the wicked, we shall spread our wings and strike. We do not want the weak, the defenseless, or the innocent, but the sadistic, the corrupt, and the wicked who prey and are from the weak and the defenseless and innocent. We will seek and demolish them until our last breath. You life-takers may have succeeded in R-ing our souls and shattering our dreams, but mark our words, the vendetta you have witnessed today will reverberate throughout every home and every soul in America and will inspire the innocent kids that you have effed to start a war of vendetta. We will raise hell on earth that the world has never witnessed. Millions of deaths and millions of gallons of blood on the streets will not quench the avenging phoenix you have caused us to unleash. Generation after generation, we, martyrs like Eric and Dylan, will sacrifice our lives to F you thousandfold for what you apostles of sin have done to us. Pain of every atom between air and water, sky and ground, heaven and hell, life and death wouldn't begin to explain the experience that we went through under your wrath. What did you expect me to do, you violators of human rights? As the time approached, I wished for a last-minute miracle and discard this mission you've given me. Heaven knows I wouldn't hurt a single leaf of a flower, but when the time came, I did it. I had to. What other choices did you give me? All this time, you never know that what a human being is capable of doing until you F him to the edge. All of you who have ever been effed by these descendants of Satan disguised as devout Christians, all of you who have went through what I went through, all of you who have felt what I have felt in my life, all of you who have suffered the wrath of these democratic teas, all of you who have been beaten, humiliated, and crucified, children of Ishmael, crusaders of anti-terrorism, my Jesus Christ brothers and sisters, you're in my heart. In life and death and spirit will soon be together. Let the revolution begin. Die, you descendants of Satan. F you, die now. I am Axe Ishmael. I am the anti-terrorist of America. Are you happy now that you've destroyed my life? Now that you have stolen everything you could from me? Now that you have gone on a 9/11 on my life like effing Osama? Now that you have effed your own people like effing Kim Jong-il? Now that you have gone on a Hummer safari on my life like effing Bush, are you happy now? Cho drew a weird heart symbol, which he referred to as the seer of veracity. It has eyes and a cross in the middle. A seer is a prophet, a clairvoyant. In the Bible, a seer is somebody gifted by God to receive visions that reveal divine truth and guidance. And veracity simply means truth, accuracy, and conformity to fact. So, seer of veracity, it sounds like he's calling himself a seer, somebody that was gifted with visions from God, and he talked about having a mission. So I find that very strange. And the seal of the anti-terrorist has an overlapping 88s. They also resemble an infinity symbol, which represents rebirth and renewal, and he referenced a rebirth in his document. By referring to himself as the anti-T, it is implied that he is acting against or opposed to or combating terrorism. Since so much information regarding Cho is missing, there's so many gaps in the story, and items like his cell phone and hard drive were supposedly never recovered, it's hard to say what exactly happened to him. One thing is obvious, though. We have not been told the whole truth. Was Seung-Hui a patsy? Was he a Manchurian candidate? Was he part of a covert program that went off the rails? Based on his writings, it seems like he was subjected to some form of trauma and abuse. We also know that Virginia universities were involved in MKUltra, and in the week leading up to the massacre, people who were in Blacksburg at the time noticed the presence of what appeared to be undercovers in the area. The agenda seems to be part of a strategy of tension to traumatize the American people collectively. And so that wraps up our two-part series on Seung-Hui Cho and Virginia Tech. So finally, I think in closing, I want to just take this time to remember the victims. I know there's going to be people out there who believe that there weren't any, that it was all staged, or that it was fake or a hoax. And I am not one of those people. While I believe that we have been lied to regarding the official story, while I believe a lot of information has been withheld from us, and it's possible that Cho was not the perpetrator, but just the patsy, I do believe people actually lost their lives that day, and I know for a fact there were people who were injured that day. My husband went to college in Blacksburg at this time, and he knew somebody who had scars from the bullets who had survived this. So yes, this actually did happen. People did pass away. I just believe that they're lying to us about it. And so that's it. That ends our two-part series on Seung-Hui Cho and the Virginia Tech massacre. But I'm interested to know what you guys think about this, and I hope you all have a good day.